Hi, Cheryl here. Welcome to my channel. And if you've been here before, thank you for coming back. If you're new to my channel, please hit the subscribe button so that you won't miss out on any of my future videos. And join me on my art journey. In this video, I'm showing you how I created this glass art piece. And I started out with random objects. I have I have sea glass pieces. I have stone fish. I have river stone. I have a slice of agate, and I am going to wrap them in copper foil. This is a video to show you how I did it. It's not a step-by-step, but it gives you the basics of how I put this together. So what I did was with the glass round pieces, I used my grinder to grind the edges so that there would be some tooth for the foil wrap to adhere to. So I'm wrapping it in, I think it's like a 1/4 inch copper foil tape, and I want to push down all the edges first, and then I take a stick or a pencil or something wood to burnish the foil to the piece so that it adheres really well. In this case, I'm using a clay tool that I didn't really use for clay much, and it seems to work really well for this purpose. So this is my tool of choice. So I am now burnishing all the way around. I'm making sure that all the folds are burnished down neatly and tight to the piece, the glass piece. So what I did here is I laid out my pieces, my stonefish, my river stone, my sea glass, and my agate stone slice, and then kind of had an idea on what I wanted to do, kind of to figure out how I was going to put this together. It didn't end up exactly how I drew it out, because I cut the pieces of glass later on as I went, so it kind of evolved on its own at the end. So continuing through this quickly, and I'll probably jump forward so that I'm not boring you to death. I wrapped each piece with the foil, burnished them all, and laid them out sort of how I wanted them. And the thinner pieces, I used a smaller thickness of the foil. I believe it was 7/32 or something like that I used. And my sea glass pieces you could see through, and the foils come in different color backings, like you can get silver lined or the plain copper or the black backed, depending on how you wanted to patina the soldered portions of the piece at the end. So in this case, my 1/4 inch was copper backed, and I'm using silver back for the rest of it. But the rest of it is, you can't really see through. So what I did was, in the end, I ended up patinaing the whole piece in copper because my sea glass was wrapped with the copper backing, and you could see through the sea glass and see the copper in the back of the stone. So I ended up patinaing my art piece with the copper, and you'll see that later on. So here we are. We have all of the pieces wrapped. I have my glass cut. I'm going to show you how I cut a few of the pieces now, and it's just using a glass cutter and some, some pressure, not too much pressure, but some pressure, and it's really just to score the top of the piece of glass. And this is a piece of opaque white glass that I'm using, and you need to use a little bit of cutting wheel oil to do that. And these are special pliers that are kind of rounded in the grip, and you place the scored edge right in the center of the tool. And when you press down on each side, it presses down on each side of the score, and it actually breaks the glass exactly where you scored it. So it's really rather simple to do. And I guess it just takes practice using the cutting tool to, stay on your lines and whatnot. But the cutter tool has a little tiny slit in the top edge, and you can use that as a guide to know where you're going with the tool. And I found that out after practicing with it for a while. But it does make it easier knowing that little spot on the front is the indicator as to where the blade is. So now after I've cut my glass pieces, I will grind them on the grinder. It's a special grinder that has a sponge that keeps the grind wheel moistened so that it doesn't heat up and burn up on you. So I'm just kind of going over the edges to get rid of all of the, if there's any glass shards that are there that could cut me, or and it also gives the glass tooth for the tape to adhere to it, and also rounds off my edges so they're not so pointy and sharp, so you don't cut yourself. So I'm just doing this in natural speed right now to give you an idea on how long it takes me to do each piece. And this is a very tiny piece, and it doesn't really need any real grinding to form it. In other words, reducing some of the glass to the edge where you want it to end up, so that it will fit. And when cutting glass, you really want to try to cut most of the glass away so that you don't have to rely on the grinder to grind off large amounts of glass. So now keeping the foil in the middle of the glass and making sure both sides are even, you apply the tape, and you want at least a quarter inch overlap. And I cut it off with the scissors. So making sure that there's no overlap, like on each side. You want the tapes to match up perfectly. That's the ideal situation. But if you don't match it up perfectly and there's a little overlap hanging on your face or the back side of the glass, you can always cut that piece off with an X-Acto blade. And you also want to flap your ends in, like this has a piece of straight piece where I will fold the two sides into it to make like an envelope fold over the side. Makes it nice and neat. And then I take my burnishing tool and burnish all of the edges first. And then I do my front and my back. And you always want to burnish the edges towards the center of your piece because you want your tape not to get messed up. See how I'm pushing the tape down and towards the center? And this will make sure that the tape is good and adhere to the glass when you do your lead work. Your taping is what indicates how your lead will end up. So the neater it is, the neater your lead will be. So here I've got it all. I also have all my other pieces tacked, and I'll show you how I tack the pieces in now. So I'm using some Nova Color, or I don't know, Nova Can. Um, Liquid flux. You don't need a whole lot. Just put the flux on, and it will clean the copper so that the lead can adhere to the copper. So I'm just taking little dabs of the solder and just placing it at each corner to lock the pieces in place, so to speak. And I'm using an old paintbrush, but there are solder brushes out there that you can buy. But I just had an old brush and I just used that. So making sure your piece is where you want it before you put the solder down, and trying not to move the pieces when you're doing it. So I wanted my art piece, to have an organic look. So I didn't fit my pieces exact all the time. I wanted my solder lines to be thicker and thinner, and I wanted holes in the piece, um, because I wanted it to look organic. So just little dabs of solder at each place where they attach or attach to another piece in the corners. And we'll speed this up so that I'm not boring you to death. I had most of it done, so now we're getting ready to actually do the solder work. So you want to put your flux down, and if you find that your solder is not sticking to your copper, it's because you forgot to put the flux down, or there's not enough flux, or the flux dried up. So I find with doing the solder work, um, I get the solder down, and then I go back over it, and I just really, you want to have like a light touch with it, and you want to have the solder round over your piece. So in other words, like if you put pressure down and you pushed on it, it would give you a flat effect. And also if you're stopping and starting, you're going to get a rough surface. So what you need to do is you need to have a light touch, and you need to, once the solder is flowing, go over it in one stroke, and it's very slow. You just very slowly go over it, and you try not to hesitate, and it will give you a nice, perfect solder line. So we'll speed this process up for you so it goes rather quickly, so I'm not boring you to death. So in this case, I have like rather odd shapes and things to go around. So it was took a little time to actually get the solder in where I needed it to be in some places. So it took a little time to get it perfect the way I wanted it. And those little pieces of solder that are sitting on my board, you can pick them up and use them. Those are actually little solder drips. And they'll go right on your iron. If you find your iron's not working well, you need to clean the tip with a sponge. I have a little damp sponge there that you can clean the tip off with, and it'll start working again. So we'll move forward, get the idea on how it's done. So here it is. It's all soldered on the front. Now we have to flip it over, but be careful when you do this because it's going to be hot if you haven't given it time to cool down. So flip it over on the back, and we'll fast forward, but we're going to solder through the back of this. Same thing. Put your solder, your flux down, and in this case, I'm holding the solder roll. Makes it easier and faster. Oh, and the other thing I wanted to mention is you see I have a folded up old sheet underneath this. And the reason for that is because the front of my piece has different textures and thicknesses. So in other words, my river stones are rather large, and the glass is only like 1/8 of an inch thick. So if I was to put this on a flat surface and I'm heating up my solder on the other side by applying solder on this side, it would allow my pieces to move. They would sink if you heat them up too much. In other words, they would sink to the level of the stone, and then it would ruin the piece. So this allows those pieces to sink down into the fabric and be supported, and the rest of it's supported with the fabric. So that's why I have the sheet underneath it. And also, some of my pieces aren't fit perfectly. The I just use the solder and I fill those gaps, and it gives me a thicker line. But again, I wanted it to have an organic feel, so I didn't want it to be perfect. So today is January 26, 2021, and we're expecting a small snowstorm in New York. I don't know how much snow we'll end up with, but it's supposed to snow today. And we're almost done with our soldering on the back. If you have any questions, put them in the comment section and I'll be sure to answer your questions. Um, and also, I'll put the materials down below that I'm using. And if you click on the links, um, this is the finished front piece, front of the piece. Of course, you have to do all your edges, same way. But that's the finished front part of the piece. Anyway, I was saying if you click on the links to the product and if you purchase the product, I'll receive a small commission. It won't cost you anything more, but I'll receive a small commission, and that will help support my channel. And if you do that, if you need any of the products, I thank you for supporting me. So I decided I wanted to edge out the art piece, and I cut some cobalt blue cathedral glass, and I have it supported in an L shape form that you push pins through. It's called Morton's Glass System, and you can buy separate little pieces to do your glass work on. It will hold everything in place. So again, I want to tack all my corners so that my glass pieces are held where I want them to be. But always putting the flux down first. I am tacking my pieces in. And then we're going to solder the line. So I'm filling my gap there. I have a small gap with the solder. And that's because my centerpiece was organic in nature, and then so it didn't quite fit up in all the spots perfectly. So just fill them with some solder, getting it down. So I'm running the solder along my solder iron in a good spot where it actually will flow when I do that. When I use the solder and the solder iron together, it's just tapping the solder on the iron so it will continue to flow as I pull along. So I'm trying to get a nice smooth line. And moving on. We'll go fast forward through all of this and move ahead quickly. So now that I have my pieces tacked, I can remove my form and continue with the finishing the front of the piece. So this is called the Tiffany method of glasswork. And of course you want to do your edges and giving them a coat of solder to finish off the piece. And I'm moving my piece around with my tweezers because it's hot. You don't want to touch it with your hands. The copper foil and the glass conducts the heat very well. So now I have to do the back side, same way. So I'm using a adjustable heat temperature soldering iron. It's a Hacko, and I'll put the link down there for the unit. But I find that if I set it at 320, it pretty much does the job for the 6040 lead, which is what I'm using right now, or the 6040 solder, I should say, which is what I'm using right now. But on like jewelry pieces, you would use lead free, and it seems to work very well with the lead free as well. So fast forwarding through this, because you see me solder the front already, and get this done quickly around the frame. So like I said before, I'm going to be patinaing this piece in copper because the lead, the copper foil tape that's around the sea glass is copper lined, so it shows copper through the glass. So in order for the piece to be consistent throughout, I need to patina this in copper. So here it is. It's all soldered. It's all together. See the difference in the texture in the surface, and it really looks sharp with that cobalt blue frame. This piece will be for sale on my website at artbycherylann.com. Going to be patining this in copper, and I'll post that video up a bit later. So please, if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already subscribed. I'd appreciate that. That will help my channel grow. And here is the piece done. It's all soldered up and ready for patina. Thank you for watching.